And with that, I would want to hand over to the presentation, and again with the title Excellence in Exploratory Testing.
My name is Torvald Mårtensson, and the topic of my presentation is Excellence in Exploratory Testing. I'd like to start with a few words. Who am I? My name is Torvald Mårtensson, and I work at Saab, which is a Swedish security and defense company. I work as test manager in the Gripen E systems development project. And that means that I work with test strategies, test analysis of the software deliveries that comes into the main track, but also that I myself am participating in the test activities in the rigs. I also work with how we can improve the way that we do our testing. How can we be better within like 6 months or 12 months? I also have a role at Saab as a technical fellow, which allows me to conduct research projects. And I do so within the context of something called Software Center, which is a collaboration of 15 companies and 5 universities. So, what is then the takeaways of this talk? We'll talk about how exploratory testing is used in large-scale industry projects. We'll walk through a list of key factors which we have seen in our studies can enable efficient and effective exploratory testing. And finally, we say a few words about what is then the future of testing. I also like to say a few words about what is then exploratory testing. And exploratory testing is a test technique that differs from what we can call traditional software testing, as it is not based on pre-designed test cases. Instead, it relies on the experience of testers, meaning that you give a task to the tester, and then the tester plans how he should test the function of the system. But based on what happens, the tester can change and adapt to what happens during the testing. So the cost is less due to that we have less cost for documentation, and it's also more adaptive during the test session. If you're interested in exploratory testing, there are 3 books that I'd like to recommend. The first one is Explore It by Elizabeth Henriksson, which is a quite comprehensive description of what exploratory testing is. The second book I'd like to recommend is More Agile Testing, where a chapter is dedicated to exploratory testing, which is a more condensed way of describing the test technique. And finally, we have Continuous Practices by Daniel Ståhl and myself, which is describing how exploratory testing plays a role in the continuous integration and delivery pipeline. My interest for exploratory testing came from where we introduced this test technique in the Gripen E project. We practice exploratory testing in teams, where we use experienced engineers from the development teams, which then are representing the different subsystems. The teams have shown to be a good way to identify complex integration problems, which I dare to say are difficult to find with automated testing. And we introduced exploratory testing about a year before the first flight of the first Gripen E aircraft. And after that period of time, after the first flight of the first Gripen E test aircraft, I interviewed the participants in the 3 test teams that we had going on a weekly basis, testing the latest version of the system in the test rigs. And one of the engineers that were part of this, one of the test teams, he said that we could test according to ideas we had. We wanted to understand the system that we were building and to find the weaknesses in the system. And for me, that's a quite good description of what exploratory testing is about. So what we have here is that the developers, they test the complete system together, not just the software module or a subsystem. So we saw a lot of benefits from exploratory testing during this first period, but we wanted to move on to improve how we can use exploratory testing. So we reached out to these other companies that are also software center companies and have conducted a series of studies with interviews, workshops, etc. And the objective for those studies was, of course, how can we, in all these companies, improve the way that exploratory testing is used? One of the first series of interviews, we asked the testers and test leaders how are they actually using exploratory testing. And we found that exploratory testing is primarily used to test new functions. So it's not about regression testing, it's about testing new functions that comes into a software mainline. And to find bugs during development of these functions and systems. And it's primarily used to test the complete system. So it's not about testing a component or a subsystem, it's about testing the complete product. We also found from the interviews that exploratory testing is described as a good way to find problems fast and efficient. And it's considered to be a more creative way to work for the testers, and therefore makes better use of the testers. Finally, it's described as a good way to test a large-scale system, especially exploratory testing with an end-user perspective. And that means that either the testers have a good view of how the end user is using the product, or that you have the end user represented in the test team. We moved on and conducted also 2 other series of interviews, and came up with, based on thematic coding analysis of the interview results, we come up with this list of key factors that can enable efficient and effective exploratory testing. And we have also validated this list in a series of workshops and also cross-company workshops with these companies that we work with as researchers. So the result is this list of 9 key factors, which we have sorted into 4 groups, which is a list of key factors that can enable efficient and effective exploratory testing. And I'd like to just walk you through this list of key factors. So, as I said, we've sorted the list into 4 groups. And the first group is about the tester's knowledge, experience, and personality. And the first factor says that the tester should know how the system is built and the correct behavior of the system. Someone said that you should have good system knowledge. Someone else described that the testers, they should have different types of experiences. And especially, of course, if you have a large-scale system with different subsystems. Someone called this test confidence, that you should know is this right or wrong. So you don't rely, with exploratory testing, you don't rely on like instructions or a design document or something like that. You know what kind of system that you're building, and you know is this a problem or not. The second factor says that the testers must also know how the product is used by the end user. Or you can, as we said before, you can have the end user represented in the test team. You should have the end user perspective, or as someone, and because, as someone said, then you know if a problem is a problem. But it's not just about knowledge, that you should know your product and know how it is used. Instead, it's also about personality. The testers should be curious and want to learn about the system. Someone said that the right personality, you should have the right personality to be interested in new perspectives, curiosity and imagination. Or another quote here, someone who wants to find the bugs. I really want to break the system, more or less. Curious and creative people. So the word curiosity is something that comes up a lot, also during the workshops that we have, both interviews and workshops. So the first group of factors is about the tester's knowledge, experience, and personality. Second group is about purpose and scope. It's about the task that we give to the testers. A well-defined purpose and scope for the test, like system functions ready to be tested, which the testers then can transform to scenarios or focus areas or whatever you call it. Someone said you should have a list of functions that could be tested, so you can do exploratory testing early, and that is, of course, in order to provide fast feedback to the developers. But test complete functions, so you know what is it that I should test. Test when the function is ready, but not too early. And that also means that this is how you should plan your development, so that you build your function in small steps, so you have something to test early. So it's purpose and scope is about what's in my scope, what is it that you want me to test. But it's also about what should I not test. Regression testing to secure basic stability and integrity in the system. What is the status of the product, known errors and problems. because, as someone said, simple problems should be previously identified and corrected from automated testing. And that is, of course, like if you have a simple problem that even the system don't even, you can't even start it, or you get like warnings or something like that. These kind of problems are quite easy to identify with automated testing. And then you shouldn't spend the time of your most experienced testers to focus on these kind of problems. So purpose of scope is about what should you include in the test and what should you exclude. What is the task that you give to the tester? Third group is about ways of working. An established way of working, including planning meetings, preparations, test strategies, etc. And a lot of the testers that we interviewed, they ask for some kind of structure for the testing. But at the same time, more or less, they directly said that it's also important to find a balance between freedom and traceability, because you don't want to go back to like instructions or test cases, etc. Instead, you want to have your freedom. So, as someone said, you must have fun to play around with things. That's more or less the idea of exploratory testing. And as it seems, one way to achieve this, to have a structure, but without relying on instructions on documents, instead you can have that structure coming from the team, to have testers with different experiences and competencies working together as a team, which can then help each other with new ideas and knowledge about different parts of the system. Someone asked for a team with a mix of individuals, testers, that's engineers focused primarily on testing, and developers. And I've seen a lot of benefits from having the developers testing the system. To test together with a colleague, that could be in that either you test in pairs or that you test as a team. And a structure for how testers should support each other, especially if you have a large-scale product. And that means either that you can support each other in like preparation meetings or that you test together. So third group is about ways of working. Which is could be provided by either some kind of instructions or documents, but primarily by the test team. So especially if a new person comes into the test team, how do you describe, how do we practice exploratory testing at this company? So that's the third group. The fourth group is about recording and reporting. Test environments that support debugging and recording. Because you don't want just to find the symptom of a problem. You want also to find the root cause. You don't want to just send a problem report to the developer saying that it doesn't work, greetings from your tester. Instead, you want to find the root cause. And a good way seems to be to also have the developer in the test team, or a test team that consists just of developers. And then, of course, have tools that allows you to find the root cause. So recording, logging, and also an efficient way of documenting what you can do if the case is that you actually don't find the root cause. It's also about reporting, a well-defined way to report the test results, including a description of areas covered by the test and a list of identified problems. So you don't want just to say these are the problems, you also want to say what have you covered and not. And if you have test cases, this is quite simple. You can say that, for example, I have 20 test cases and I've executed 15, and therefore, and of those 12 have passed. So then you know how much work have you done, how much is left, and what is the status of the product. If you work with exploratory testing, this might be a bit more tricky. Then you have to describe this in like focus areas or something that you can say how much have I done and what's left. So to document in a good way what you have done, so you don't miss important areas. Someone asked for that you should report the executed testing in a visual way, is the best way, or another voice even said that you should involve the people interested in the test, to take them to the test facility and show them the problems instead of writing a report. So as we can see, these 9 factors, they span over very different areas. It's about the tester's knowledge and personality. It's about the purpose and scope. What should I include and exclude? What is the task that we give to the testers? It's about ways of working. For example, if you have a new member of the test team that comes into the team, how do you explain in a good way, how do we practice exploratory testing at this company? And fourth group, recording and reporting. How do you in a good way describe what we have tested, what's left, and what's the status of the product? So 9 factors covering many different fields, which are all important for when it comes to enabling efficient and effective exploratory testing. Okay, I'd like to conclude with a few words about what is then the future of testing. And I worked a lot with automated testing, both on component level and system level. I myself introduced automated testing on system level in the Gripen E project. And I see a lot of benefit from automated testing. We have test activities running on a daily basis, both on simulated environments and also on real hardware. And it's a great tool. But I dare to say that it's not about choosing one test technique to saying that if you have automated testing, that's all you have. Instead, you should embrace that you need different test techniques that could complement each other, which could be exploratory testing and automated testing complementing on each other, each one mitigating the weakness of the other. Automated testing is a great test technique that provides rapid feedback to the developers, but is then focused on regression testing. Exploratory testing, on the other hand, can provide more in-depth insights as it utilizes experienced engineers to identify complex integration problems. So it's not about are you pro-automated testing or are you pro-exploratory testing. It's about embracing that these two test techniques can complement each other in the continuous integration and delivery pipeline. Okay, so it's time for summary and takeaways. We have said that exploratory testing is a more creative way to work for the testers, a good way, and also a good way to test a large-scale system. So it's not about testing a component or a subsystem. This is primarily a test technique for testing the complete product. We have talked about these 9 key factors that can enable efficient and effective exploratory testing, saying that they span over many different areas. The first one was about the testers, their knowledge and personality. The second group of factors was about purpose and scope. What is the task that we give to the testers? The third group about ways of working. For example, if you should onboard a new member into the test team, how do you explain how we practice exploratory testing in this company? And the fourth group about reporting and recording. How do you explain what have you tested, what is left, and what is then the status of the product? So four groups of key factors spanning over many very different areas, all important to enable efficient and effective exploratory testing. And finally, we said a few words about what is then the future of testing, which, as we said, is that you must combine different test techniques. Automated testing, providing rapid feedback to the developers, and exploratory testing, which can identify complex integration problems. Okay, and that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Torvald, for an interesting presentation where I think you gave a very good illustration of how a method and new technique also changes the ways of working, in this case in a large development organization and especially within testing. So thanks a lot, Torvald, on behalf of all of us. And good to see you. We have Torvald with us online for questions. And I do have a question from the audience in the chat, so I will start with that one. And the question reads, so test of complete products, did you fly the plane?
Yes, of course we did. But before you come to the first flight, there's a long time of testing, which is lots of different test activities on like component level, subsystem level, and also, as we described here, exploratory testing of the complete product in test rigs.
And again, I do encourage the audience online to please share any questions you might have with us in the chat, and I will direct them to Torvald. So next, Torvald, you listed a long list of different factors that you feel enable an effective exploratory testing practice, basically. Is there a priority, like are there some factors more important than others?
Yes, I think you can say that, especially in the first phase when you introduce exploratory testing, because then I would say it's quite hard to start with like ways of working. How should we develop some kind of instructions or something like that? Then it's more important to work with the first three factors, which was about the tester's knowledge, experience, and personality. So if you don't have that in place to have good testers, then it's very hard to work with the other factors. So in that way, you can say that's in the first phase, the first three factors are more important.
Thank you. I hope the person asking the question were happy with that answer as well. We have questions coming in from the chat. When using and adopting exploratory testing, how do we know when we are done?
Yes, and as we said in the presentation, if you have test cases, then you can say that, well, if we have 20 test cases and have executed 15 of them and 12 have passed or something like that, then you know how much work you've done and how much is left. So if you work with exploratory testing, you must in another way describe your complete test scope and work with like saying that these are the scenarios that I should fulfill, or these are the test areas. I believe that the best way is to combine these two, to have both a list of functions that now I've run through these functions and I have no open issues, and also have tested like the HMI, robustness, etc., and say that these test areas, or whatever you like to call it, that I fulfilled, I completed these areas as well.
And maybe related to the more organizational setup when using this technique, these test methods that you present, do they apply to all types of products across an organization, or do you see them suited more for a specific type of projects?
What we're seeing when we studied different companies, we have seen differences in how you use exploratory testing. For example, if you have a product that is a car, then they have a driver that is in the front seat, and then your testing is to a large extent based on that. But if you have a camera system which has no like user in the same way, then you use it differently. But I think it's in particular if you have a large scale and complex software system that you can't exactly predict the behavior, then there's lots of benefits from exploratory testing. But if it's something very small, then it's easier to describe like some kind of component test or something like that.
So now you mentioned two examples. You mentioned the car, the automotive, and you mentioned camera. So these are two different domains, I assume also two different companies. Are there other differences that you see with regards to the different types of companies you studied this in?
Yes, it's also about the, so to say, the maturity of how you have adopted this test technique. For example, we're seeing that in some companies, the testers seem to work more as lonely wolves, but in other companies, they more work together as a team. So it's about how far you've come in adopting the test technique. And that can also be in the way that, for example, management are actually using the reports from testing in general, and also exploratory testing to see what's the status of the product.
There is a question here coming in from the audience about are there risks of missing key problems because you rely on the developer's view of the system?
Yes, of course, and it's a good question that you tend to be, of course, biased if you test your own software. And the problem is that if you have an independent tester, then you have another problem, which tend to be that then you don't have enough knowledge about how the software or the system is constructed. But one way of mitigating this is to put together, as we said in the presentation, to put together teams of testers representing different subsystems that comes from the development teams. And then you can have the developers testing each other's functions and systems. And then you kind of both have knowledge about the different subsystems, but also that you're not biased in the same way.
I will take one more question before concluding this. There is a question, do exploratory testing, can it only be done at the last step when all components tests are already completed?
Well, it depends. If you say that the components are now completed in the way that this is the final build, so to speak, then of course the answer is no, that's not the way how you should do it. But you must have some kind of working system, of course. But the best benefit is to use this in parallel with development. So you shouldn't see this as like the final tests. Then it's almost too late. So you should use exploratory testing in parallel with development.
Thank you so much, Torvald, for presenting and for being online with questions. And please stay with us until the end of the session. But until then, we ask you to turn your camera off. Thank you very much.